Thank you, Tom, for joining us from Australia today. Very much appreciated. This is the first conference we've held in, oh God, a good few years. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So can I hand over to you, Tom?
Sure. So what I wanted to look at was, it was a challenge I started to face, which was what sounds like a platitude, which is change for the better. But if we think of it architecturally, then next slide. So if we think of it architecturally, if we've got that phrase, change for the better, what architectures do we need to ensure that every change we make actually is going to make something better, that we actually have some means to do it? Next slide. So if that's the case, then we've got four key concerns, or four issues to make it actually work. First one is, what the heck is better? How do we identify it? Second one is, architecturally speaking, we're going to need a bunch of structures that will actually support giving us better. So sort of ways of getting better. The third one is, how do we actually do the work to do the planning, the implementation, and then the runtime to actually make it happen in real time? So to actually help us keep on track to better. And the last one is, if we've got something done, how do we check that it actually is better or not better, and what do we need to do to improve? Next slide. So first one, how do we identify better? Well, this is a quote, literal quote from a client who said, what we really need is a totem pole to unify the tribes. We've got to have something that will connect people together. So we're talking about vision, values, commitments. Next slide. So there's three methods that we're using this one to make it actually work. The first one is, what the heck is a story that will hold things together, to make a totem pole to unify the tribes? So there's a standard structure we use, which is really you can do the whole of a vision statement for an entire enterprise in 3 words, which is what TED did at the TED conferences. So if we take that classic description, ideas worth spreading, or to some extent Open Group's one about boundaryless information sharing. But we'll use the TED one. So the first question is, what is everyone concerned about? Right the way through the entire story. Think of it like BCS. What is the thing that unifies, that is concerning everyone in BCS? And in the TED example, what everyone's concerned about is ideas. Second one is, what is everyone doing? The action. What are they doing about that concern? Well, in the TED example, it's where everyone is spreading ideas. That's what they want to do, is spread ideas. Third one is, why is this important? Why does it matter? And the answer in the TED one is, these are ideas that are worth spreading. So that would drive people to say, we want this to happen. We want to make it happen. So you've got the concern, the action, and the validation, the thing that actually says why it's important to everyone. So we can use this as the core anchor for a quality system. In fact, this is the way that ISO 9000 does it. It is the ultimate anchor to every question, to every quality concern. Next slide. So once we've got the vision statement, which, as I said, can be as little as 3 words, what we want to do is derive values from it, definitions of better. So if we take that ideas worth spreading, how do you know that an idea is worth anything, is worth spreading? What do you use to actually identify that it's worth it? So, for example, it's an idea that seems to be useful, that it actually seems to have some value, that it helps people, that it makes something easier, better to understand. Those are examples of a measure of an idea, a metric or a guide for that it's worth spreading. And what about, oh, hang on, someone is saying, would it be possible to switch to slideshow mode, which apparently it isn't.
Oh, sorry, I thought we were.
I thought we were as well, but it may not be visible to someone else. I don't know. Anyway, we'll continue. See whether that works, because otherwise we'll run out of time. There's not many slides in here, and they're all readable. So the other one is about what is good spreading. What is good about the action? How does the action work? And given you've got those, then what sort of rules, laws, and so on? What are the standards that you're using to make it work? Oh, that's better. Right. Yep. Okay. So once you've got all of those are helping to identify what better actually is in order to make it happen. And you can also give you, in places, good metrics. You can have quantitative ones as well, but they should work. So next slide.
Sorry.
Just hit the space bar or something.
Technology at its worst.
Yeah. So the third one is you've got building a map of stakeholders. And the definition I use for a stakeholder is anyone who can hold a sharp pointed stake in your direction if you get it wrong. There's an awful lot of stakeholders. It's not just a couple of business folks. So the 4 layers I look at, given if you're the organization, then there are 4 points you've got, which is the internal ones, the people who are actually going to make things happen. The transaction, they're your people like suppliers and customers. The market space, which is all your direct interaction with regulators, with competitors. They're all sitting up in these sort of spaces. And the last one is the indirect interaction, which is what I call the enterprise. It's about the outer point of the scope, people who have the same concern that we're talking about, whatever this one is. So that's how you're going to define what better is, or identify what better is. It's going to give you a bunch of values that you're going to use within your organization. Next slide.
That's really good. That I might reuse that if you don't mind, Tom.
Yeah, sure. Welcome. Yeah, that's what I said. So the next challenge, next part of the challenge is what structures do we need? So we're thinking architecturally. And one of the criteria that I use is that we want some kind of structure that's going to work the same way everywhere. Every scope, every scale, every type of content or context, any time scale. And that has a link to make sure that we can keep track on terms of what better is. Next slide. So this is a framework called Enterprise Canvas or Service Canvas. If anyone's familiar with it, this is a kind of mishmash of viable system, Stafford Beer's viable system model, Alex Osterwalder's business model canvas, and a bunch of other stuff all mixed in. And it's documented in a lot of ways. There's a couple of books on it. But the point here is that we've got a structure which will work the same way everywhere. We make an assumption, and it is an assertion, not a fact, that everything either is, represents, or implies a service. So we can use it the same way, every scope, every scale. That's a fairly straightforward structure. I can talk about it some other time, but we ain't got much time today. So next slide. The important point is that there's a systematic way of getting values into whatever service you're doing. So that whatever service, and that's the validation services, it's about everything is a service within the services. So a service, a pervasive service, or pervasive or validation service is one which everyone is responsible for. And it's things like safety, security, efficiency, reliability, and then industry specific stuff like taste. Does the food taste good? Or is it robust? Is it resilient? Is it self-repairing? Those are things that will be classed as better in some industry or another. Financial probity is everyone's responsibility. So for each value, there's 4 things. 1, we've got to explain why that thing is, what that thing is that we say needs to be kept track of, and then also why it's important. So for example, financial probity is really important to the business, because if you don't have it, you're going to go bust and you're going to have the regulators on your tail. So it's everyone's responsibility. Safety is everyone's responsibility. We're got to explain that point. Explaining it isn't enough. We've got to help people get training or whatever to build the capability, the ability to do it at runtime without thinking, without needing to stop and think. So we want, in security, for example, in code, we want it embedded everywhere in every single thing. It's not an afterthought. Then once we've built the capability to actually do it in everyone's work, the other one is to make sure it happens at runtime, that it isn't just left as a platitude in the background. And finally, you need to be capturing information about what you did in order to be able to assess it afterwards. Because if you can assess it, you can then improve. And what we want to do in a review is to look not just for what went wrong, but also what went unexpectedly right. It's very easy to focus on things that don't work. So we'll come back to that in a moment, but that's a structure that we can do. So that's the service itself. We're embedded in every service. Next slide. But we also embedded in the things that move between services. So between every service, there's a cycle going on about how do you connect with someone? So why would someone come to you? The sort of the brand is an example, or the reputation. Then building the relationship with that person, either virtually or in person. Building a conversation or a contract to say what you're going to deliver. Those are the things you want to do before any action takes place. Then you've got the main action itself, the transaction or interaction. Again, in three parts. There's the starting it up, doing it, and then stopping it. Once you've done that, you've got a bunch of other completions to do. You've got to complete for the contract. You've got to complete so that the customer is satisfied. You know, you've checked that the customer is satisfied, and also complete for the story. By which I mean that you make sure that other people outside of your organization or outside of that interaction are happy with what's happened, so that both players have been served correctly and it fits the nature of the story. So those are the kind of structures we want to support getting better happen right the way through. Next slide. So we get to the third bit. How do we actually do things? What structure do we need and discipline do we need to actually make things happen? And again, we want to apply the same point, that the methods are going to work the same way everywhere. And so they all support whatever the better is. Next slide. So the usual one, what you see in a Gantt chart, is a task. Do something. That's a very incomplete task. Next slide. At the very minimum, we want to have some kind of plan, right? And build work instructions, whatever. Build the other checklists, get the resources in place so we do things right. But that's still not complete. Next slide. For every task, we want to check that we're doing the right thing. And if we're not clear what the right thing is, we've got to check what the context is and the scope so we don't get scope creep. We need to check the context because that's what's going to give us the values that we need to make decisions when we don't know what the hell's going on. We don't have time to go back and look for them later. We have to be able to do them at runtime. And the other one is that after every task, we want to do some kind of check to make sure that we've done it right. Oh, sorry, that we can learn from it, that we can use it as a way of improving. So we want to capture enough information in the task to do benefits realized, lessons learned. Next slide. So structurally, this is a thing, we've called this thing change mapping because you're keeping track of every concern that you have, any item that you have, to then do something with this structured approach of context, scope, plan, action, review. And because it can be deeply recursive, fractal, nested and all that, we need a mission start and a mission end to actually get it right, get it done in each chunk. But the other one is that gives us a very bland abstract thing with a standard set of checklists and all the rest, but it gives us something that will keep us on track. But that's very bland. In real world, we're going to need all sorts of tools to deal with the specialization and whatever the detail we want to add when we want to go into the detail. But every tool is a plugin that's called in exactly the same way. We want to know the context for the scope, for the tool, Does it match the context that we've got? Does it match the scope that we're working with? Do we understand what the plan is, otherwise known as the instructions for using that tool? We then do the action if we're happy. And at the end, we check to see whether that tool delivered what we needed. So it's exactly the same process, exactly the same methods everywhere, including when we're calling for tools. Now, the method inside the tool may be completely different, but the way we've called for it and kept track of it is the same. Doing that sounds like a bit of overhead, just like checking the context and scope is. But if you don't do it, the chances are that you use the wrong tool for the wrong place and it won't work. So every tool's a plugin in the same way. Next slide. So given that we've got something that would give us understanding of what better is, given what we've got the structure, given where we've got a method that's going to work the same way, how do we actually verify and improve? So we need a method to test and verify alignment to better, and that will help us get better on, get us more in line with getting an improvement happening. And for that, next slide. There's a standard method developed by the US Army originally called an after action review. And the whole idea is it gives us a systematic way for getting benefits realized, lessons learned, and to test. So it has, in the original, it has 4 steps. I had added one more and I'll explain why in a moment. So the first one is what was supposed to happen, for which the answer is we need to have a plan in order to know what was going to what was supposed to happen. Then the second one is what actually happened, because reality department usually has different ideas. But what we need to do here during the in order to be able to answer what actually happened, we needed to have recorded at the time what is actually happening and the exceptions and so on that we had to handle during that space. Having got what was supposed to happen and what actually happened, we can now look at the difference. And it will show us, did we get what we intended? What did we meet the benefits required? Did we get to the desirable outcomes that we specified in the context space? Then the next one is, from that we can also, the next one is we can derive change tasks from that. So what did I learn to do differently? To know what I do need to do differently next time to do better? And then, because this part is different, what can the team do? Because it all means that you've got to, what do you have to change, not just individually, but in terms of the team dynamics. So that's the one bit that I added to the original. And there are 2 really, really important rules. The first one is no blame. The moment there is any blame, no one's going to learn a thing. So it has to be about, we're trying to make things better, not whose fault is it. The second one is quite an interesting one, which is pin your stripes at the door. And that's about making sure that everyone had a job to do. In a review like this, no one is more important than anyone else. So if the boss says, I've got a different idea, you ignore it. The boss is no more important than anyone else in an after-action review. So this gives us a means for continually supporting continual improvement consistently every time. Next slide. And the reason why this is important, well, it sounds like a platitude and it sounds like a lot of work, but this gives us a way of supporting continual improvement. And improvement is in terms of better, if you think of it that way. But it gives us a systematic way that works the same way everywhere in every context and helps us build it. The important point is that change for the better sounds like a platitude. It's not, it's a call to action. Because if we don't do this, the kind of risks we're going to fail are, you're going to have a total mess with silos going all over the place, and you're going to get misalignment to the value, so you're not going to get better. You're going to, as I said, you're going to have chaos between silos with everyone doing their own thing. And also, you've got a real risk of having all sorts of clashes with customers, suppliers, regulators, God knows what else. So this stuff is really important. That's why we say change for the better is not a platitude. It's a call to action. Next slide. This is a bit of a sales pitch, but everything I've been describing here is in these 3 books. They are a systematic way of looking at this. The first one is about what's the basics, so how do you get it done. Second one is about all the plugins that we've been talking about in this, such as the after action review and so on. And the advanced one is how you do it in the real kind of change management stuff, which gives us linked missions and so on to actually see how this works. So it's much more about the real world stuff. So that's it. Next slide. And just to say, that's me. That's who I am. Anyone who wants to know more about this, get in touch.
Thank you
I hope that's been of some use and sanity.
Thank you very much, Tom. Can I just ask a question? Okay.
Sure. That's what I'm here for.
Oh, no. So in my presentation later, I'm looking at disruptive forces. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
You know, and what triggers change. So, for example, I'm going to be talking about regulatory stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
But when we talk about change for the better, yeah.
Yeah.
How do we identify the stimulus? Where do we get, we talk about change, but it's the what. What are we actually planning to change? Are we talking about the whole enterprise? Are we talking about parts of the enterprise? So that's my first question. The second question.
The answer to that is yes.
Everything.
Yeah, anything. It could be anything from just changing a switch to changing the entire business story. Okay. The point I've been giving here is that the same methods work exactly the same way everywhere. Now, the definition for better needs to come from the enterprise, and interestingly, not just from the organization, but from the enterprise story that the organization has chosen to be in. Okay. So, for example, BCS has chosen to be in the story of getting better in doing IT. That's the world that you're in. So looking at that, what are the values that arise from that? So, for example, you've been pushing very hard for security. That's a very important thing in an IT environment. A very simple example is that the local telco, which unfortunately I was using, has just had a data breach of 9 million customers.
Jesus.
With passport data, driver's license, God knows what else. The only thing they didn't get was bank accounts. 9 million customers. Yeah.
Okay. So we've got.
So these things matter, right? How do you get better? How do you keep track? How do you not lose track of what's going on, which is what happened with Telstra, with Optus.
So we've got a question from Alexandra
Sure.
Franco. Yeah. So the question is, first of all, thank you. Very interesting. His questions are in 2 parts. The first question is, who should be leading the introduction of this model in the organization? Okay. And then the second question is, should this model be part, and this is where we might disagree, Tom, should this model be part of the technology operating model?
Right. Item 1, if you're starting from an enterprise architecture for space, you would need to be doing it with the change management group. And this is actually what we did in Australia Post. So this is based on some of the work we did in Australia Post about 20 years ago. I've refined it a bit with some of the structures. So it's not something you can just casually throw together. You're going to need executive support. But you can weave it in, or you can do it just simply, you can choose to do it. It's not going to change anything in terms of, or rather, it's going to be a process change, but it's not actually going to threaten anyone. So it's not going to be, disruptive in that sense. The other one is that it can be in the technology department, but what the aim is you want to infect the rest of the organization. Now, the danger of having it in the technology department is it tends to sit there, particularly when you don't have alignment across the space. So you really do need a support from the CEO as opposed to just the CIO or CTO. There are all sorts of nasty problems that can happen if you only do it in the technology environment. I've got a number of horror tales that will show that this is one of the reasons why you have to get an enterprise architecture, not just in the IT area. But
Okay, I hope
that's.
that,
Did that help, Alexandra?
I think it's Franco. Yeah.
Yeah, Alexandra is his first name. Yeah.
Oh right. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I've got another question. This is my last question.
Sure, go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you talk about metrics. Yeah.
Yes.
And for me, it's the identification of those metrics. You know, when you're looking at change and more importantly, looking at disruption. Yeah. How do you actually say, right, okay, all right, we're going to derive value from this, but how are we going to know what, you know, if we've achieved real value? What are those metrics?
Right.
And how do we identify?
Okay, some of your metrics are going to be qualitative, not quantitative. If you can find a quantitative one, great. But a lot of them you've got what you might call a pseudo quantitative by just simply saying, did it feel better? Did it, you know, better is often an emotional descriptor rather than a quantitative one, an objective one. But when you've got a description of what the value is, like, did this improve security? Does it give us better security? Does the customer feel safer? Now, you can't always use a numeric metric on that one, but you can certainly use a qualitative one.
Okay.
If you remember my model called Semper, which was it's actually about power, but it was a model of presumed ability to do work. And for that, we just simply used tag phrases. I'll give you a very simple example quickly because we're running out of time. Let's say the question is, do you have the information that you need? Right? Because the ability to do work depends on whether you're getting the information you need. If someone says, yeah, I have everything I need right now, right in hand, exactly when I need it, and nothing else, nothing to distract, that person's going to be able to do a lot of work. Someone who says, the system here is crap, we can't get the right information, it's never there, and most of the time it's wrong, that person's ability to do work is going to be a lot less. And so you can test it with a simple piece of text, a simple question, like, does it feel better? And if the answer is one or the other, then you've got a pretty good idea of what the state is. I did it on a 5-step. We used 5 typical answers. People picked one of 5 answers to the question, and that gave us a pretty good idea of what the state was in. And it was qualitative, but it gave us numbers. I'll talk you that through with you some other time, Dal.
That'd be good.
Yeah. It's in the book Semper and Score. If you've had that one of mine, I'm not sure if you have it.
I think I have probably got around most.
Yeah, so you've got it lying around somewhere. So the details in there.
Brilliant. Listen, Tom, we have
used to have it. Yeah.
We
you come to an end,
the
but that's. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I hope that was useful.
Thank you very much. We will be sharing the recording.
Sure.
And the slides will be up, made available to all participants.
Yeah, and again, please send me a link too for it. So that
I will do. And Tom, I'll talk to you tomorrow. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Cheers then.